This is the higher robotic vacuum, or what they call their smart sweeping robot. They don't have a model or series number with this, so they just call it the smart sweeping robot. So there may be other versions of this. Particular version is red, and is what I call a combination robot vacuum, and meaning that it does both regular vacuuming and kind of a wet dry mop kind of thing. I personally have been a fan of like robot vacuums for many years. I've specifically with iRobots, I own 3 of those. I have an old 300 series scheduler that's about 10 years old. I have a Scuba that I don't use anymore, mainly because I changed houses and the flooring can't really use the Scuba with the way it wet mops. And then I have the dry and wet mop or damp mop Brava, which I still use. And you know, I kind of think of them almost like pets, as I've named all of my robots. But the Roomba one is, again, the oldest one. It's 10 years old. I call him Fred. I mean, and even though he's kind of on his last legs after 10 years of basically weekly use is what I used him for, I still use him, although he isn't as effective as he used to be, and has got a few shakes and rattles that he didn't have a couple of years ago. And you know, although I have some gripes about the iRobot brand and about some of the way they design the robots and that kind of thing, I do like them a lot. But this is the first one, non-iRobot, that I've actually tried and used. I mean, 10 years ago when I bought this 300 series scheduler, iRobot was pretty much the only game in town. And now there's a bunch of, competitors out there with Nito along with several others. And now, and again, I wasn't familiar that Haier was in the business of making vacuum robots. I'm familiar with the kind of small refrigerators that they sell at the box stores, but this is the first time I've ever seen one of their robots. And although it's not exactly, I would consider, a fair comparison, I kind of am going to compare this robot to my 10-year-old Roomba. It's not exactly a fair fight, considering the Roomba is, older and not as effective as it used to be. But based on my experience with that, I'm going to kind of compare the two versus that, along with the Brava that I have too. Now, included with this robot, they give you quite a few things. You've got the virtual wall here, the instruction booklet, which is okay. It could be maybe a little bit better detail, but it's okay. A remote control with battery, a couple spare side brushes, a cleaning brush, along with 2 HEPA filters, one which I've got in the robot now, a couple of what I would consider dry wet mop pads, along with the attachment here, the attachment that attaches for when you're doing the wet mopping or dry mopping thing. Now, design-wise, this particular robot is pretty similar to the Roomba design, although there's some things that I think are a little better in its design than my older Roomba, and some things that I think that it needs some improving. One of the complaints with my old Roomba is how dirty the components get inside, because the motor and the gearing is not sealed off from the vacuum area. Now, this created issues with dirt and hair getting caught up in the gearing mechanism, and can really mess up the gears. And it's really difficult to kind of clean those areas out with my old Roomba. And you have to clean it, or eventually kind of creates issues with the robot. The one thing about this is it seems like they've done a better job, and I'm going to open up the hatch here, at sealing off the components from, and it's a little hard to see, but sealing off the components away from the dust bin or the dust that's collected, as opposed to the old Roomba I have that kind of throws it in the back here. If you're familiar with the Roomba, it throws it in the back half here, but it really kind of creates a mess. Now, whether iRobot has fixed that issue in its newer models, I can't really say. I don't know because I don't have the newer one. It's one of those things that I'm probably going to get when my old scheduler completely goes out. But I can't say if they fixed that issue, but it's definitely an improvement compared to my older Roomba anyway, in terms of how they've designed this slot here, this cleaning slot. So that's one thing I kind of like better about this particular robot. But on the other hand, though, this robot has some design issues that kind of need some improvement. And I'm going to kind of splice my video with some examples of it operating and some of the examples of why it has some issues in with this as well. For one, this has two side brushes, and I'm going to grab the spare here because it's just easier to grab. It has two side brushes on each side. I'll show you there on the bottom there. And the biggest thing with this is I like that it has two, but these brushes are secured by magnets, which make them sometimes pretty easy to pop on and off, make them easy to put on. But the big deal with that is it also makes them easy to get lost. Whereas the Roomba has those screwed on that are locked on with a screw. And I've never lost one off of the Roomba in 10 years of use, whereas I've lost these brushes every time I've used them. So I've had to hunt them down every time. I mean, it's great that they give you spares, but I've had to hunt these brushes down every time because they've came off somewhere, usually under the bed. And I think that it's too easy for them to come off. So they really should have done something to create a lock for those brushes to lock them in place. Now, the robot has a speaker voice, and I'm going to try to play that here. And well, maybe it won't play because it still hasn't charged up the battery from me running it now. But the speaker voice itself, it's a nice touch, but the voice isn't always clear, and it's accented. Typically with like what I would consider maybe a Hong Kong or Chinese accented voice, making it kind of hard to understand. In addition, the speaker's not loud enough, making it even harder to understand than it should be. And oddly, even though it has a speaker, and unlike the Roomba, there's no warning noise with this vacuum when the vacuum gets stuck or when the batteries go dead. When it's vacuum, or even when the vacuum has completed its cycle. I think this particular vacuum needs an improvement with the speaker to have a louder, clearer voice, and the addition of warning sounds or warning voices to say low battery, stuck, cycle complete. Whereas the Roomba gives you that dee-dee sound that alerts you to let you know it's either stuck, the battery's dead, or whatever, or it's got a problem. And this one doesn't do that for some reason. Now the vacuum, this runs much quieter than my old Roomba. But again, I'm comparing a 10-year-old Roomba that's kind of developed its own rattles and noises after 10 years of use. But it does appear to be a little quieter than what my old Roomba was when it's new. Again, I can't compare the new ones because I don't know at this point because I've not tried the new ones. But I think this is in part it's quieter because this has a little bit less powerful vacuum motor on the inside than the Roomba. Now, although the instructions indicate that this needs to be charged overnight on the initial charge, this kind of indicated it was fully charged in a couple hours of charging. Now, again, with the battery being dead, there's a LED display up here, as you can see, because it's basically letting me know the battery needs to be charged. But that'll kind of flash, and when it's done, it'll actually say full. So, that's a nice touch. Although, again, I think the LED display could be probably a little bit easier to read. Now, the batteries in this are smaller and less bulky than the Roomba, but to me, in my experience with using this, it equates to a shorter run time for the robot as compared to the Roomba. My Roomba gets about 90 minutes or so on a new battery pack in comparison to this battery set that gets me about 60 minutes or so. The one thing I noticed about this, though, initially is the smaller suction area. Maybe this is what a couple inches. Let me put a ruler up here. Roughly about 3 inches wide, maybe a little less than 3 inches wide, as compared to the iRobot, or the one I have that basically has one that kind of goes the width of the rear of the vacuum, and that to me equates to cleaning a smaller area at a time, and it has to make more passes over an area to fully cover the flooring. Again, I kind of think that's because of the smaller vacuum motor. To compensate for that, they're trying to create a little bit more powerful suction with a smaller suction area. But again, it has to do more passes to do more area. I mean, it does a decent job at cleaning. I'm going to show you a little bit of that in this video after I let it run for a full cycle. But I think it's less effective than what a new Roomba does. At least in comparison to my experience with my Roomba over the years. Now, I mostly use this on carpet, but it does seem to be a little bit more effective on a wood or a tile surface in terms of vacuuming. One of my irritations with the robot, though, is that it has although it has the feature, I've yet to get this thing to go back to its base on its own. It always runs out of battery and never goes back to base. And although my old Roomba base stopped working a couple years ago, and I now manually plug it in, I very rarely ever had the robot fail to go back to its base when it was nearly out of battery or when its cycle was finished. It has a home mode on the top here that will make it go to this base, but it never has done it on its own. Now, I tend not to use the virtual walls with either of my robots because I prefer this to go all over the floor as opposed to restricting it. But I found that these virtual walls are essentially the same. Although I haven't tried, I would think that they almost work interchangeably with each other. Now, the robot does clean in a similar manner to the Roomba, with this occasional bump into an obstacle and direction change, but it doesn't seem to have as good a well mapped out route as the Roomba does, or with its programming. It avoids the stairs with no issues, and it does bump more softly than the old Roomba, but I think that's something that's been improved with the new iRobots as opposed to the old one I have. But I just don't think the programming is as good, and could be a bit better in terms of how it vacuums, because I've had it at times stay in one room only for one reason and only clean that particular room and not go into the other areas. So whereas the Roomba, I've never had to worry about that. It does everywhere. This does have various cleaning modes, a spot mode, a clean mode, but it lacks a max mode like the Roomba has that runs it dry until it's completely depleted. And it's programmable as far as a schedule like the Roomba. And that works fairly similar to what a Roomba does. Now, this does come with a remote here, which my Roomba doesn't have, but the remote has a limited range of a few feet, meaning you can't really direct it across the room. Which to me seems to kind of defeat the purpose of a remote. And it also kind of ignores the commands from the remote more than what it obeys, in my opinion. To me, the remote's not a particularly useful feature. It could be, but it's not as good as it could be. And I'm going to show a little video with this too in here. Is the robot tends to get stuck more easily than my Roomba in areas that my Roomba's never got stuck, such as a corner next to a cabinet. Again, I think this is in part due to the less powerful motor to turn the wheels. And one thing that I did have noticed just recently with this is that it seems to have a kind of a spotty working safety feature, as it does not always turn off this mechanism when you pick it up like my Roomba does, which automatically stops. I say that mainly because of the fact that, if you've got small kids that like to stick their fingers in things, or a kid with long hair, and this thing, they pick it up and it doesn't necessarily stop. they could get their fingers caught or their hair tangled up. So I think that's an issue with this robot too. Again, it's doesn't always do that, but I've had it when I picked it up and it continues to run. The mopping feature is okay. This attaches to the bottom of the front of this robot, and it works similar to the Brava, although I personally think that the Brava works better overall with its mopping capability and its smaller, more compact design that gets it around areas easier than this bigger vacuum. I mean, neither one are going to get stubborn stains off the floor, or if you expect that with a mopping vacuum. They really don't do that well, but it works okay in that respect. I personally prefer the Brava to handle the mopping and let this stick to the primary design, which I think is the vacuuming. I'll show this. I've showed this in another part of the video, but I like this bin. It's easy to access, easy to empty. It makes less of a mess, and it's easy to clean. Whereas the Roomba dustbin, you know, can't be cleaned up with water. So I like that. It isn't a large bin, but it's being easy to empty. It's less of an issue. One of my biggest complaints with the iRobot brand, and I kind of hate to keep going back to the iRobot, but that's my primary experience with these kind of vacuums, is I think they're expensive and they should be more economically priced. Especially considering their latest one, which I think is like an 800 series, is like $800, which is 4 times as expensive as this robot, or 4 times as expensive as most regular vacuums. This is a more reasonably priced vacuum, but there are compromises with this, you know, price range of being around $200. I don't think it's as powerful as the Roomba in terms of vacuuming. It's got its own kind of quirks and design issues. And in this case, I think Haier should concentrate on making a more powerful vacuum robot and create a separate mopping unit instead of trying to combine all these features into one. Because I think, you know, doing that, it kind of makes it suffer, especially in terms of power. It's a decent robot vacuum at a reasonable price. It isn't quite what an iRobot is capable of or as feature-rich as the Roombas, even my 10-year-old Roomba. And it remains to be seen how durable this vacuum will be compared to my Roomba that's 10 years old. It's a decent robot for the price. I give it 3.5 stars. As you can see, the LED indicator here is showing this is full. It's hard to see the different buttons, but there's the voice that I was talking about. There's the spot, a planning mode, a clean mode, home, and then a trash can for deleting, I guess, what you program. But I'm going to let this go on clean mode and kind of show how it does its thing and how loud it is. And then after this gets done vacuuming, I'm going to show how much dirt it collects. I run this weekly along with my iRobot Roomba. I run that weekly as well, and I want to just kind of show you how much this picks up. One of my issues with this is this thing gets stuck really easy. As you can see, it's kind of stuck against one of the bed frame posts here that I have to kind of tap to get it to move. So it tends to get really stuck, or stuck more easily than my iRobot does. So I wanted to show, after this thing made its full cleaning cycle, how much dirt it picked up in the bin. Now again, keep in mind I do run my robot vacuums, including my Roomba, weekly. So this is from a week's worth of use. But as you can see, you just pop the top here, and this is the plastic bin. And I want to open this here just a second. I'm going to try to do this one-handed here, just to kind of show how much it did collect. So there's a little filter screen here. Also, in addition to that, there's a HEPA filter there. And let's see how well you can see that. But let me try to Let me try to gather it up here. So there's the amount of dirt that it picked up from a week's worth of dirt being accumulated for its run. I mean, again, it does a decent job at vacuuming. I don't think it's nearly as strong as the Roomba, especially my Roomba that was in when it was in its prime. It can probably outdo my 10-year-old Roomba now, but the Roomba definitely picked up more, mainly because it's got a stronger motor in it.